Hey everyone, welcome to another theory breakdown. Now, I've talked about the three value composition or four value composition a lot of times. Now, I forgot to mention there is another thing when it comes to the three value composition that is a bit more basic, but I didn't really go over. I didn't actually go over because it's something that is very natural. It's something that a lot of people naturally does, but sometimes if you're not aware of it, you might make a mistake with it. And it pertains to the 60-30-10% quote unquote rule. Now, what does it mean? So we have to understand that nature is chaotic by their nature. It's most likely not going to be even if you look at all these plants, plant life, and other animal life as well, how we, for some reason, evolved. We're uneven. Our proportions are all over the place. We're not like every limb has the same length and that type of thing. So but it's like there is a balance to it. There's a reason for it, but it's somehow imbalanced as well. So what is 60-30-10? It's basically depicting how I said three value composition distributed, but in a lot of cases you could bring it to anything in art. So for example, proportions wise, you don't want to be too even with your characters. Hue wise, you don't want to have the same hue, the different hues with the same ratio over the canvas. So I want to explain. 60-30-10 means that how much space in a two-dimensional plane, basically your artwork, is something taken. So the three aspects, if we were to talk about values, would be the darkest value, black. We could talk about the mid-tone, and we could talk about the white. Now, it doesn't have to be those, obviously. It's just saying whatever is the darkest, whatever is the middle, and whatever is in the lightest value. Now, ensures that, again, you're not making artwork that is too even, because that is going to make it look unnatural. As artists, no matter what style you're going for, most likely you are trying to create a sense of realism, no matter if you're doing anime, cartooning, or abstract art even. I'll give you some examples of what I mean. When things are too even, people feel uneasy. It is ironically the chaos having different ratios of stuff that make it look more natural to people. Now, of course, do not be too anal. It's not really like a hard set rule that has to be 60-30-10. It's just to guideline, something to kind of get as a reminder for people to not have very even proportions of things as they work. Now, I'm going to start with the most extreme example because I've never really talked about this type of art, and it's abstract art. Now, this is Piet Mondrian. I'm pretty sure a lot of people have looked into his work, maybe in high school or elementary school. Very prolific abstract artist. Anyways, notice that his compositions, let's just put it that way, his compositions are very, in a way, deceptively simple. The older I get, the more experience I get, the more I realize Piet Mondrian is not a simple abstract artist. He knows his stuff. A lot of cases, people kind of think it's just a few colors, most likely red, blue, yellow, as far as I recall, and then there's black and white. However, the way he arranges these squares, these rectangles, they are absolutely masterful. I can't even explain how difficult it is when you break down art to the simplest terms, when there is no fluff, no details, how hard it is to get a really appealing composition like this. A lot of people try, they think they get it, but artists like Piet Mondrian, they really understand how to deal with racials. They'll notice I don't really need to state the obvious here, but just gonna do it for the sake of clarity. Notice how, look at these three hues. Now, there's only three hues in this prominent hues. You could say black, white, and black, but whatever. Notice how each of these has a different ratio, and each of these are arranged and positioned in such a way that the piece is still balanced despite the fact that these are three hard line primary colors in different ratios, completely hard to unify and balance. And a lot of cases, if I want to go a little bit off topic, the black lines here, they help unify the piece, bring it all together. And of course, we can talk about the white squares as well. The fact that it's just distributed and also different sized, it helps in that case. But again, I implore you to try to only use these types of shapes with these types of colors. It is not easy, but it is a great example to show you what I mean when I say have a very unnatural ratio. You don't have to do 60-30-10 again, but this is a masterful take on having uneven ratios. Anyways, let's look into Fan Ho, one of my favorite photographers of all time. Now, this piece, right off the bat, when we zoom out, you know that the 60% you could say is mid-tone. Again, I'm not going to measure this. We're not computers, but just assume based on the impression of it and what's your first impression, what's your perception of it. It would mean that this is a very mid-tone dominant piece. Then we look into what's the 30%. We could say the second most dominant value would be the darks. So notice how the character here and the sides here are very dark. Of course, it's mid-tones to break it. Very nice. Of course, he doesn't get the luxury of photoshopping back then, but you get what I mean. Now, of course, the last ratio would be 10% with the light. Now, the light here is very subtle. It's not even that exposed. So understand that this might not even be 10%. This is a predominantly mid-tone to light mid-tone type of piece. Gives a certain mood. Fantastic use of ratios here. Very uneven. And of course, photography, when you take a photograph, chances are you are most likely going to get uneven ratios. Let's go to James Jean. Let's do something from a different realm. Now, look at James Jean's work. We could say 60% you'll say is mid-tone. 30% would be the darks. A lot of cases, James Jean uses a lot of lines or perceived lines. So generally, lines can be very dark at times, and of course, there's light lines there too. But whatever. Point is, a lot of line work tend to bring that, and of course, 10%. I wouldn't say 10%, but again, we're not measuring perfectly here. It's just whatever is the least dominant value. So that would be the lightest value. So one thing I want to mention that this type of ratio can define an artist. You might notice that a lot of artists, professional artists rather, their styles tend to have very specific ratio. So for example, a very dark artist, a very moody, very haunting artist, they might have 60% dark at all times, or most of the time. Now, that's not to say 60% means that every piece has to be freaking dark. There will be nuances when it comes to subject matter and how they compose the artwork. But general rule of thumb, artists have preferences in what they're looking at for their work. Now, speaking of which, we can say Tadahiro's work here. Not that he is defined by 60% dark at all times, but notice how he wanted to push the light of this piece. So 60% would be the dark, 30% would be the light to contrast with the dark, and then you have the 10%, which are the midtones here. You can see here, type of thing. Very nice. Again, a natural distribution helps to create the sense that it is real, as if, even though, again, a lot of these 2D designy type of artists would play with these ratios a lot. So keep that in mind if you like this sort of artwork. Never again, even when you are simplifying into shapes, do not have even ratios. Now look into Lindsay Kostosh. I keep mispronouncing the name. Bear with me. This type of artwork, again, very dark heavy, so 60% dark here. And I would say the light and mid-tones are fairly even, but I'll say it's more to 30% light to mid-tone 10%. Again, you'll find that this type of ratio, when 60% is dark, 30% is light, you end up with a piece that really accentuates the light. And you'll find that in a lot of cases when it comes to this particular distribution. Now let's look into this one. Very mid-tone heavy, 60% mid-tone, 30% dark, 10% light. Don't really need to say much about that. However, I do want to note that similar to Piet Mondrian's work, notice how these colors, these dominant squares, literally squares on the walls, they have a very specific ratio. So again, look into this and look into this as well. It's the same fundamental theory, but done in a different style. Obviously, well, there's Malcolm T. Lipke, by the way, if you're looking for this type of artist. His work, predominantly a lot of cases, he plays around with people on a wall or people on furniture, and you'll find that he distributes his colors and values in such a way that, again, it looks appealing and it looks like it's done unevenly, which is very nice, very natural. Final artwork. Now, I've reviewed this before, but you can bring this to character designs as well. A big part of why, not to say these are the final designs for 2B, but a big part of why the Nier Automata characters worked was because uneven ratios. Now, we're not talking about how wide her hips are compared to her torso type of thing. We are talking about the clothing, and we could assume that obviously predominantly 2B is 60% dark, predominantly dark. Then we could go with mid-tone and light, depends on how you really call it, but I would say mid-tone wise it'll be 30% because of her skin, and then the 10% is her hair. Now, it doesn't really show in this particular case. This one might be the closest, but goes to show you that even if you are doing one individual character like this, we're not talking about full illustrations, keep these ratios in mind. Again, it feels weird when we see something that's too even, and you'll find that in fashion as well. Look into your wardrobe, actually, and see what you like to wear. Chances are you would distribute colors and values in such a way that's appealing. Very few people would like to just wear complete black in most cases. There would have to be some mid-tone-ish colors going on, and there would be some whites going on. But either way, you'll find that similar to character designs, these ratios do pertain to that type of stuff. So to finish it off, I really want to emphasize the point that nature is chaotic. Again, chances are nature is like balanced in such a weird way, and that is sort of like a way to think about how to create realism. Realism is not about perfection. In fact, the best realist artists, they're really good at making imperfections balanced. And this is, again, one theory to a ton of different theories that can improve your work when it comes to trying to replicating nature for your particular style. Anyways, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.